Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. Today's monitor review is a little bit different from the norm because the product we're looking at, the AOC Agon AG273QG, by itself isn't a very interesting product. It's a standard 27-inch 1440p 165Hz IPS gaming monitor using what appears to be an LG Nano IPS panel, the same sort of typical mid-range 1440p monitor that we've seen for a while now. But what is super interesting about today's video is that it presents us an opportunity to properly test the differences between a standard adaptive sync monitor using a regular scaler and a true G-Sync monitor using a G-Sync module from NVIDIA. That's because AOC have two variants of this display on the market, the G-Sync based AG273QG that we've tested today, and its FreeSync alternative, the AG273QXP that we reviewed at the end of last year. Back several years ago, this used to be a big talking point in the gaming monitor world, as there were lots of products that came out in G-Sync and FreeSync versions depending on the GPU ecosystem you were part of. But in modern times, both types of display work on all graphics cards, so whether you buy something with a G-Sync module or a FreeSync sticker on the box, it will work on AMD and NVIDIA GPUs. This leaves buyers with far fewer significant differences between these monitors, so today we'll get a good look at whether it's still worth paying the price premium for the G-Sync version. Speaking of that price premium, at the moment we only have Australian pricing for these monitors. The FreeSync model, the AG273QXP, comes in at around $570, while the G-Sync AG273QG is a $750 monitor when not on sale. So this gives us a $180 difference, or about $140 US, which is a typical margin we've seen over the years. As NVIDIA's G-Sync module is much more complicated than a regular display scaler, it's a more expensive piece of hardware and as such commands these higher prices. The AG273QG also differs from the FreeSync model somewhat in the design, particularly for the stand. The FreeSync model uses a large 3-leg stand in silver, while the G-Sync variant uses a sleeker stand with red highlights. Visually, I prefer the shape of the AG273QG stand, however its red elements may not please those that prefer neutral color tones for their desk setup. On the other hand, the display section is largely the same, with a bit of LED lighting on the back and overall a simple layout that looks fine. Despite the change in stand, the G-Sync variant retains great adjustability, featuring all of height, tilt, swivel and pivot support, which is exactly what you'd want from a high-end display. On the other hand, the number of ports has been reduced to just a single display port and single HDMI port, so one HDMI port has been removed. To make matters worse, that HDMI port is bizarrely just HDMI 1.4, so it can only be used up to 60 Hz at 2560 by 1440, making it a bit worthless, so this is one area that has definitely been downgraded. The OSD is still controllable through a directional toggle on the bottom edge of the display, and its layout is functionally identical to that of the AG273QXP, just with a few minor differences for the G-Sync module's features. Same inclusion of things like cheek crosshairs and the like, very similar array of color controls. Despite using a directional toggle, I actually find this menu to be a bit difficult to navigate and operate, though luckily it shouldn't be something you'll need to use that often. Response time performance is next up, and like previous AOC monitors, there are 4 overdrive modes available, the first of which is the off mode. Stock standard overdrive disabled performance here, with a 10 millisecond average response and no overshoot. I don't imagine many gamers will choose to operate the monitor in this mode. Next up is the weak mode, and here the monitor starts to perform as expected. A 5.45 millisecond gray-to-gray average response time is significantly improved over the previous mode, and that comes with only a slight increase to overshoot. In practice, you won't see significant inverse ghosting in this mode, so it's a great candidate for gaming. The medium mode is faster again, bringing us up to a 3.86 millisecond average response time. However, as a result, overshoot has increased significantly as well, now to the point where inverse ghosting is present for 41% of the transitions we measured. Despite this, cumulative deviation has only increased slightly compared to the weak mode, just 10% higher. So while the balance of speed and overshoot lies with the weak mode, the medium mode isn't too far off, and the extent to which overshoot lingers on the display is small. The strong mode is unusable in my opinion. It's the fastest of all tested modes at 3 millisecond average, but now the majority of transitions exhibit inverse ghosting to a large degree, so it's not worth using this mode. One of the benefits to buying a G-Sync display is that you get variable overdrive, so the AG273QG does provide a single overdrive mode experience in the weak mode. As we move down from 165Hz to 100Hz, performance remains quite consistent, in the 5.2 to 5.7 millisecond range for response times, and in the 10 to 15% range for inverse ghosting rate. When we get below 100Hz, the monitor switches to a different overdrive configuration automatically, which helps keep overshoot to a minimum despite having a small impact to response times. This keeps cumulative deviation locked in that 500 range rather than increasing like a lot of other monitors, which is ideal behavior. In contrast, the AG273QXP's most equivalent mode is the medium mode. This FreeSync monitor does not have variable overdrive, so as we move down the refresh range, we see similar though somewhat worse performance at higher refresh rates. Then down at 85Hz and 60Hz, performance falls away a lot, as the monitor does not automatically adjust its overdrive settings. This means that with the FreeSync variant, if you want to play at lower refresh rates, you are better off adjusting the overdrive settings manually, which prevents us from getting a single overdrive mode experience. Compared to other monitors at their maximum refresh rates, the two AOC products we've been comparing today end up delivering very similar performance. This is because both monitors use the same panel and have similar overdrive settings at the high end. The FreeSync monitor is slightly faster overall, especially as it has a 170Hz versus 165Hz refresh rate, but overall this is quite negligible. Where these two monitors deviate in performance is when we take an average across all refresh rates measured. The AG273QG uses variable overdrive, so it can maintain its strong performance for a wider range of refresh rates. This gives the G-Sync variant performance in line with other excellent 1440p displays like the MAG274QRF-QD, and a very decent 41% faster than the FreeSync model. That's because if you want to set a single overdrive mode on the AG273QXP, you have to turn down the overdrive setting to avoid nasty overshoot at the lower refresh rates. And even if we just let the FreeSync model overshoot like crazy, the G-Sync model has less than half the inverse ghosting rate at an equivalent response time speed. This leads to the G-Sync model having better cumulative deviation. You can watch our video linked in the description below that provides more information on this metric, but basically, cumulative deviation measures how close a response gets to the ideal instant response, so it gives us a better idea of the balance between speed and overshoot. In this metric, the G-Sync model is 11% better and ultimately ends up one of the best implementations of this LG Nano IPS monitor. Not quite as good as the new LG 27G P850, but better than others like the Dell S2721 DGF. At a fixed 120Hz, again, the AG273QG puts up a good offering, but isn't that different from other monitors that use the same panel. Similarly, at a fixed 60Hz using the best overdrive mode for this setting, performance isn't that different compared to other monitors either. It's the ability for this display to give us the best performance at all refresh rates without changing the overdrive mode that sets this monitor apart, whereas other displays like the AG273QXP have had to be manually tuned to deliver the results seen in this chart. Input latency is no different between the AG273QG and AG273QXP, indicating there is no latency penalty from the G-Sync module. The FreeSync variant has a slight advantage due to its 5Hz higher refresh rate, which decreases refresh lag. Power consumption is an interesting one. The AG273QG had noticeably higher power consumption at the same brightness level, 23% higher power consumption actually, which seems to be a byproduct of the G-Sync module. In higher end monitors that feature HDR, we know that the G-Sync module at times requires active cooling, so this continues to be a problem for NVIDIA's variable refresh module. The AG273QG doesn't require a fan or anything like that, but higher power consumption is worse. The AG273QG supports NVIDIA's ultra-low motion blur or ULMB technology for backlight strobing. This only works with NVIDIA GPUs as it requires you to enable it in the NVIDIA control panel, so it won't work on AMD GPUs or other input devices like game consoles. It also only works at up to 120Hz, and while image quality isn't terrible, it ultimately hasn't solved the red fringing issues present with backlight strobing on LG Nano IPS panels, so I don't think it's a mode worth using or considering. For color performance, as the G-Sync and FreeSync variants both use the same LG Nano IPS panel, at least as far as I can tell, wide gamut coverage is identical. That is to say, you get 95% DCI-P3 coverage, which is pretty good for a gaming monitor. However, in Rec 2020 coverage, we see only average wide gamut capabilities, indicating this panel does not support Adobe RGB, as well as some of the widest wide gamut displays with upwards of 80% coverage. Another benefit to getting a G-Sync display is that as part of the certification process, factory calibration is required for grayscale. What we see here is the result of that: near perfect gamma and CCT results leading to almost no tint to the display, and good Delta E results around the 2.0 to 3.0 range. However, the display does not come with an sRGB gamut clamp enabled, so out of the box color performance is oversaturated, and that leads to high Delta E's as you'll see in these charts. The results of this are on show in our comparison chart, where the AG273QG is right up the top among the best monitors. However, the FreeSync version, the AG273QXP, is also pretty good all things considered, with a Delta E ITP of 4.1. Color checker results are better than average, but still not accurate due to the lack of that gamut clamp. Unfortunately, the AG273QG does not include a functional sRGB emulation mode, so there is no way in the hardware controls to limit oversaturation. As a result, there is no way to significantly improve color performance through the OSD, so we'll move on to factory calibration. As always, we get strong results here, especially for sRGB. Grayscale performance doesn't improve significantly, as factory calibration was already very good, but the use of an ICC profile can give us proper sRGB accuracy in applications that support ICC profiles. P3 work is also reasonably good after calibration, only lacking in the very top end of the color range as gamut coverage isn't 100%. Peak brightness is good from the AG273QG, coming in 8% higher than the AG273QXP, which isn't unusual to see. Both are around the 350 nit mark that AOC specifies for these monitors in the spec sheet. Minimum brightness, on the other hand, is lower with the G-Sync variant and more suitable for gamers that like playing in dim environments. Something that does not differ between each model is the contrast ratio. We've now tested many monitors that use 1440p LG Nano IPS panels, and the end result for contrast is always somewhere around 850:1, which is the case here. In fact, the two AOC models are virtually identical, which makes sense as the G-Sync module makes no difference to the fundamental characteristics of the panel itself. Uniformity, again, very typical for these panels, and the results between the AG273QG and the AG273QXP are almost identical. Uniformity is quite good with these displays, but not perfect, and of course things like backlight bleed and IPS glow do vary from unit to unit. Overall, this video has been quite insightful at discovering how NVIDIA's G-Sync module and associated certification process improves a monitor that would otherwise use a regular off-the-shelf adaptive sync scaler. With AOC producing both the AG273QXP and the AG273QG we've looked at today, we've gotten the perfect information to assess the benefits of G-Sync for mid to high-end monitors in the 2021 era of gaming displays. In some areas, there are obvious benefits to the inclusion of true G-Sync. Variable overdrive does improve response time performance, delivering a single overdrive mode experience with overall transition times up there with the best seen on an LG Nano IPS panel of this type. Now, variable overdrive is also possible with FreeSync displays. We've seen that before with something like the Samsung Odyssey G7, but it is a mandatory part of using the G-Sync module, so that does improve these situations where the FreeSync version doesn't include that feature. NVIDIA also mandates a certain level of factory calibration, improving out-of-the-box grayscale accuracy versus the FreeSync version. However, there are also some things the G-Sync version doesn't do as well. For some reason, this version only has one HDMI 1.4 port capped to 60Hz, pretty useless compared to the two HDMI 2.0 ports and the FreeSync version, and this situation where the FreeSync model tends to have more ports is pretty typical when we compare FreeSync to G-Sync. Both versions support backlight strobing, but only the G-Sync variant locks that feature down to NVIDIA GPUs, and ultimately the mode isn't that good anyway. Power consumption is higher as well due to the inefficiencies of the complex G-Sync module. The rest of this monitor's features and performance are unchanged, as G-Sync doesn't improve things inherent to the panel itself, like contrast or uniformity. NVIDIA also doesn't mandate a functional sRGB mode, so we don't get that here. However, on the positive side, true G-Sync monitors are no longer restricted to just NVIDIA GPUs, so anyone can enjoy the improvements being made here. While the G-Sync version of this AOC monitor is definitely the better version in my opinion, it's not significantly improved enough to justify the much higher price tag, which locally is around a $180 difference or $140 when converted. Due to this price difference, the two versions are basically competing in different markets. The FreeSync AG273QXP makes sense as a more value-oriented 1440p monitor given its performance. The G-Sync AG273QG is good, but it's harder to justify up against high-end alternatives at a similar price, like the MSI MAG274QRF-QD, a monitor that is simply better. Like with a lot of our monitor reviews, of course, this does depend on the exact pricing of monitors in your region and the potential for sales. The AG273QG at the time of filming this review is actually on sale locally at some retailers, which makes it a much better value proposition than at its regular price. But that's also true of other monitors like the Dell S2721 DGF that frequently go on sale as well, so it is always a balancing act between figuring out which monitors are best at the right times. Anyway, that's it for this discussion. I thought this might be a bit of more of an interesting take on this review, comparing FreeSync to G-Sync with two very similar monitors, so this could be insightful for your next monitor purchase. As always, if you want to support our monitor testing, we have our Patreon and Floatplane accounts. Links to that are in the description below. If you sign up, you'll gain access to things like the ICC profiles we generate for our reviews. You'll also get to chat with us about monitors in our private Discord community, and there's things like behind the scenes monthly live streams, all that sort of stuff. So thanks for watching. I'll catch you in the next one.